Folks in town still say they should have seen it coming, but back then no one paid much mind to the quiet ranch worker walking across the dusty yard with his head down and his thoughts fixed on something no one else understood. The morning had started like any other, with cattle lowing in the far pens and the usual talk drifting from the porch where the hands gathered before work. Yet something felt different, like the air itself was waiting for a decision that would shift things in ways no one could predict. Most people didn't even notice the lone horse tied near the auction pen, pacing in slow, tense steps as if trying to decide whether to bolt or stay. But he noticed, and that choice is where the trouble and the wonder began. The workers standing by the gate were already shaking their heads at the animal, trading comments in low voices. They said the horse was mean as a snake, stubborn as dried mud, and not worth a single coin. They said he'd caused more mess than all the other horses on the ranch put together, biting one hand, kicking at another, and ripping through more fences than anyone cared to count. Folks muttered that the animal was cursed or just plain wild, and no amount of training could fix a creature that had made up its mind to hate people. The ranch manager had already decided the horse would be gone by sundown, sold off cheap to anyone foolish enough to take him. The worker watched from a distance while the sun crept higher, setting a warm glow over the corral. The horse stood with his ears pinned back, sides twitching from leftover stress, his coat still dull from neglect. He was nothing special to look at, not the kind of horse any rider bragged about. Yet there was something in the way the animal held himself that caught his attention, something raw and worn down, but not broken. He stepped closer, taking in the way the horse's eyes flicked between people like he was measuring escape routes. The worker knew that look. It was the same one he had worn more times than he would ever admit. Word spread fast around the ranch that someone had stepped up to buy the horse no one wanted. People stopped what they were doing, turning to stare as if he had just done something unthinkable. Whispers rippled across the yard, some wondering if he had lost his sense, others nudging each other and grinning like they were waiting to see something blow up. Even the ranch manager stood with his arms crossed, watching the exchange with a puzzled expression. The worker paid the small sum asked for the horse without bargaining or second-guessing. He took the rope in his hand, and the horse jerked back hard enough to send dust swirling through the air, but the worker held steady. The walk from the auction pen toward the far pasture felt longer than usual, partly because nearly everyone stopped to stare. The horse fought him every step, tossing his head, rolling his eyes, snorting at every shadow. The worker didn't raise his voice or yank the rope. He just kept walking, one slow step at a time, letting the horse burn off whatever fire he needed. He had done hard jobs before, work that called for patience when others wanted speed. This was no different in his mind, though he could feel the weight of people's doubts pressing on him with every passing second. When he finally reached the pasture gate, he opened it and stepped aside, giving the horse space to move at his own pace. The animal hesitated, as if unsure whether to run or stay. For a long moment the two stood facing each other in the stillness. Somewhere beyond the fence, a flock of birds took off, the rustle of their wings breaking the silence. The horse looked toward the open land, then back at the man holding the rope. It was a small moment, quiet enough that no one watching would think much of it, but it carried something deeper, like a question left hanging in the air. The worker led the horse to a corner of the pasture where the grass was short and the shade from a lone tree stretched across the ground. He let the rope fall loose and stood beside the horse without touching him. The animal flicked his tail and shifted uneasily, unused to the kindness or maybe just waiting for the next order that wouldn't come. The worker reached into his coat and pulled out a piece of dry bread, holding it out with an open palm. The horse took a cautious step closer but retreated again when a pair of ranch hands laughed near the fence line. The worker didn't move his hand or say a word. Eventually the horse stretched his neck and snatched the bread in one quick bite, then stepped back with a confused expression as if unsure what trick he had just fallen for. The ranch hands watching from the fence weren't impressed. One of them called out that it wouldn't last, that the horse was going to show his true colors soon enough. Another joked that the worker had just bought himself a load of heartache and bruised ribs. They had all seen trouble before, but something about this situation gave them an odd satisfaction, like they were waiting for the moment they could say they were right. The worker ignored their voices and kept his focus on the horse, calmly letting him adjust to the open space. As the day wore on, clouds rolled in from the distant hills, casting shadows across the pasture. A cool wind brushed the grass, carrying with it the smell of rain. The horse lifted his head every few minutes, alert to each sound, each shift in the sky. He paced along the fence, testing the loose boards as if wondering whether he should try breaking through again. Rumors said he had escaped 3 times in 1 week, tearing down rails and leaving nothing but splinters behind. Some folks believed it was pure spite. Others said the horse was looking for something no one could give him. The worker stayed with the horse until the first drops of rain hit the ground, cold and sharp. The horse flinched at the change, ears pricking. Instead of leading him to the stable, the worker opened the gate and let the animal choose where to go. The horse stepped forward, scanning the yard, then followed the worker into the small barn by the workshop. It wasn't much, hardly bigger than a storage shed, but it was quiet, out of sight, and far away from the eyes that waited for the animal to fail. Inside, the horse paced in circles before settling enough for the worker to brush the mud from his coat. Every time the brush touched him, the horse twitched like he was expecting pain. The worker's hands were steady, moving slow, careful not to startle him. He could feel how tense the horse was, every muscle tight, every breath quick. It took nearly an hour for the horse to relax even a little. By nightfall, the rain had grown steady, drumming on the roof in a soft rhythm. The horse stood near the open stall door, ears turned toward the sound, his body no longer trembling but not fully at ease either. The worker sat on a small stool nearby, arms resting on his knees as he watched the horse take everything in. Outside, the ranch had gone quiet except for the low rumble of thunder in the distance. The worker knew the horse had been through something the others didn't understand. He knew this wasn't going to be a simple task or a quick fix. As the lantern light flickered across the horse's worn coat, the worker caught a mark near the animal's shoulder he hadn't seen earlier. A thin scar, pale against the darker fur, curved like an old wound that had never healed right. It wasn't the kind of mark that came from brushing against a fence or getting caught on a branch. It looked deliberate, and for a moment he wondered who might have done it and why the horse reacted the way he did around certain people. He leaned closer for a better look, but before he could think further, the horse suddenly stiffened, ears pointing toward the barn door. The worker turned his head and sensed someone standing outside, hidden in the rain and waiting without speaking. The lantern shook slightly in his hand as he rose to his feet. Something about the quiet presence at the door sent a chill through him. When the door creaked open just enough for a shadow to slip in, he felt the air change. The horse backed up with a low, warning snort, eyes wide and fixed on the darkness behind the doorway. And in that moment, the worker realized the horse wasn't reacting to the storm at all. He was reacting to whoever had just stepped inside. The days that followed brought more questions than answers. Folks kept glancing toward the ranch whenever the wind carried a burst of frantic neighing. It became a sort of whispered talk at the feed store and along the main road. No one said the horse's name out loud because no one had bothered to give him one, but people knew exactly which animal they were referring to. They talked about the dark coat that caught the sun like polished stone and about the uneasy way he paced the fence line as if expecting something to come out from behind the hills. Some people said the ranch worker should have taken the warning signs seriously. Others claimed he had brought trouble to the town by dragging that horse from the auction yard in the first place. Every rumor made the animal sound more troublesome, more unpredictable, more like a mistake waiting to happen. Yet, even with all the noise around him, the ranch worker acted as if he was trying to understand the animal rather than control him. He spent long hours beside the corral, not doing anything flashy or rough, just watching the horse move and breathe. There were moments when the horse slowed down, head lowered, muscles still tense but not as wild as before. Those moments gave the ranch worker hope, though he did not share that with anyone. People around here preferred quick answers. They never had much patience for uncertainty. One chilly morning, the frost still clinging to the wooden rails, the horse started acting restless again. He kept turning in tight circles, snorting as if the air carried a warning. The ranch worker stepped into the corral with steady steps, and the horse stopped circling. He did not calm completely, but he froze long enough to look straight at him. There was something in that look that made the ranch worker pause. It was not fear and not anger. It felt closer to confusion, as though the animal was searching for something familiar in a place full of strangers. Later that day, as the sun slid behind the pines, a group of townspeople gathered near the ranch fence. They acted like they were only passing by, but everyone knew they had come to watch the horse. A few stood with arms crossed, waiting for something to go wrong. Others whispered that the animal had a scar on his flank that had not been there the day before. Someone else claimed the mark looked too clean to be from the fence. No one said it out loud, yet the idea hung in the cold air that the horse might have been hurt before arriving in town. The ranch worker heard every word, though he pretended not to. He crouched near a pile of feed sacks and kept a calm tone as he talked to the horse, who stayed at the far end of the corral. The animal's breath came out in clouds, ears flicking at every sound. The wind carried a sharp whistle through the fence posts, and the horse jerked his head in that direction, muscles tight again. Before dawn the next morning, the ranch worker saddled an older mare and rode out beyond the pastures where no one could follow easily. He needed answers, or at least a clearer sense of what he was dealing with. He had seen the worry in the horse's eyes the previous night, and it left him unsettled. Something about the way the horse reacted made him think of an animal that had survived more than rough handling. It was as if the horse expected danger to return. The trail he followed cut through a thin stretch of trees leading to a hidden valley that was usually quiet. But that morning, fresh tracks marked the soft ground near the stream. Hoofprints, but not from his ranch horses. They looked hurried, overlapping, leading toward the rocky slope at the far end of the valley. He studied them with a long breath, trying to guess what they meant. The shape of the prints suggested more than one horse, and the depth showed they had been moving fast. Something had stirred them enough to run through thick brush without hesitation. He followed the trail until it reached the edge of a ridge. Beyond it lay open land stretching toward another settlement miles away. He scanned the horizon, expecting to see riders or stray horses, but found only the quiet sky and the distant call of a hawk. Still, the tracks confirmed what he suspected. The horse he had brought home had not wandered aimlessly before the auction. He had come from somewhere, and something had driven him away. When he returned to the ranch, the townspeople were gathered again. This time, the horse stood pressed against the far fence, ears pinned back, gaze fixed on the open trail behind the corral as if waiting for someone to appear. The wind carried a scent only the horse seemed to recognize. His tail swished nervously, hooves shifting in the dirt. One of the ranch hands walked over and whispered that the horse had started acting up the moment the sun rose. Another said he thought he heard distant hoofbeats before anyone was awake, though he could not be sure if it was the wind playing tricks. The ranch worker stepped inside the corral, slow and steady. The horse trembled but did not rear or bolt. Instead, he watched the ranch worker approach with a strange mix of fear and hope. It was the closest the animal had come to letting someone near him. The ranch worker reached out a hand, but stopped just short of touching the horse. The animal did not pull away, only blinked and let out a tired breath. There was something behind those eyes, something that had not been there before, a story hidden under scars and silence. The ranch worker could feel the tension stretching between them, thin but steady. If he pushed too hard, he would lose whatever progress he made. If he waited too long, the horse might slide back into the wild unease that kept him distant. Before he could decide what to do next, a sharp whistle broke across the ranch yard. It came from the direction of the main road. The horse jerked his head toward the sound with such force that the ranch worker staggered back. The animal's entire body went rigid, as if the whistle meant something he remembered all too well. The townspeople froze. Some looked toward the road, others at the horse whose breath now came in short bursts. The ranch worker stepped between the animal and the fence, trying to calm him, though he could feel the horse's rising panic like a storm building in his chest. No one spoke. The ranch yard was quiet except for the heavy breathing of the frightened horse. Then the whistle came again, sharper this time, cutting through the cold air. The horse lifted his head, ears locked on the road, eyes filled with something that made the ranch worker's heart pound. It was not fear anymore, it was recognition. and whatever the horse recognized was coming closer. The second whistle cut sharper than the first, slicing through the still morning air. The townspeople who had gathered lifted their heads toward the road, unsure whether to move closer or step back. The horse tensed so hard that every muscle along his shoulders stood out like coiled ropes. His attention locked on the road without wavering. The ranch worker stayed close, keeping his stance calm, though he felt the same uneasy chill moving through him. A tall figure appeared near the bend in the road. The man walked with a slow, heavy stride, the kind that came from covering long distances on foot. His coat was worn and dusty, and his hat sat low over his eyes. He carried nothing in his hands, yet the air around him felt weighed down by something unspoken. The horse pressed his hooves into the dirt and blew a hard breath, staring as if he knew the stranger. The ranch worker stepped between the man and the horse without thinking. He could feel the weight of the moment building like a storm cloud. The man stopped several yards from the fence, taking in the scene with a gaze that held no rush. His eyes moved from the horse to the ranch worker, then to the crowd that had gathered. Not a word was spoken, yet the air grew tighter with every passing second. Someone from the crowd finally found his voice and asked if the stranger needed help finding someone. The man did not answer right away. Instead, he tilted his head just enough to see the horse fully. For a flash of a moment, something changed in his expression. It was not shock, and not surprise either. It was something quieter and harder to read, like a memory returning after being buried for a long time. The ranch worker sensed the shift and placed a hand on the fence rail. He asked the stranger if he had business on the ranch. The man looked at him and said he was only passing through, but his tone left the meaning open. He said he had heard talk about a horse with a scar on his flank. His voice dropped slightly when he said it, as if the detail mattered more than the question itself. The ranch worker felt the tension spike through the crowd. Everyone knew the horse had a fresh scar, but none of them had ever mentioned it to outsiders. The ranch worker kept his tone steady as he asked why the man was interested. The stranger brushed off the question, claiming he had seen a horse like that before. He lifted his gaze toward the corral, and the horse stomped the ground, snorting as though trying to warn him away. The ranch worker did not move from his place, but inside he felt a slow churn of concern. He asked the man if the horse belonged to him. The stranger shook his head. He said the horse came from a long trail of trouble, and he wanted to be sure the ranch worker understood what he had taken on. His words stirred unease in the crowd. Some of them stepped back, while others leaned forward to hear more. The horse shifted again, his sides rising and falling fast. The ranch worker held up a hand to calm him, though he was hardly calm himself. Something about the stranger's presence threw everything off balance. The man spoke with too much certainty, like someone who had been following signs and finally reached the place he had been looking for. The ranch worker asked how he knew anything about the horse. The man paused before answering. He said he had crossed paths with a group of riders days earlier, riders who were looking for a lost horse that had escaped during a storm. They claimed the animal had caused trouble before, and they were determined to bring him back. The stranger did not say much about who these riders were, but the way he spoke suggested he knew their type well. The ranch worker felt the weight of the information sink in. He studied the stranger's face, looking for any sign of truth or deceit. The man held a steady gaze that gave little away. The ranch worker asked what kind of trouble the riders claimed the horse caused. The stranger hesitated, then said the horse had been blamed for damaging property and breaking free from several holding pens. He added that some believed the horse had been involved in an accident during a night of bad weather, though no one could say exactly what had happened. The crowd murmured among themselves, trading theories and guesses. The ranch worker knew the horse had been nervous and unpredictable, but he also sensed something deeper in the animal, something that did not match the stories being passed around. He felt a growing conflict inside him. He did not want to dismiss what the stranger said, yet he also did not want to believe the horse was nothing more than a problem waiting to resurface. The stranger took a step closer to the fence, and the horse jolted backward with a sharp snort. Dust scattered beneath his hooves. The ranch worker stepped sideways to shield the horse's view, hoping to calm him. The stranger raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm, but the horse stayed tense. The ranch worker asked the man why he was warning him if he was only passing through. The stranger let out a slow breath and said he had seen what happened to horses caught in the wrong hands. He said he did not want this horse falling back into the same pattern. He added that if the riders found their way to the ranch, the horse would not be treated kindly. The words settled heavily on the ranch yard. No one spoke. Even the wind seemed to quiet down. The ranch worker studied the stranger again, trying to measure the truth in his voice. The man's expression softened for the first time, and he said the horse deserved better than being chased down like a problem. The ranch worker felt something in him shift, though he still held on to his doubt. When the stranger turned to leave, the horse relaxed slightly, though his eyes remained fixed on the man's retreating figure. The ranch worker stayed inside the corral until the stranger disappeared around the bend. Only then did the townspeople start whispering again, each voice filled with fresh worry. Some claimed the stranger was telling the truth. Others insisted he was part of the group looking for the horse. A few suggested he might return with more people. The ranch worker did not respond to any of the rumors. He focused on the horse instead, watching the way he lowered his head but kept his ears alert. Something had shaken the animal deeply. The ranch worker felt the tension in the air settled into something heavier, something that would not fade any time soon. That evening he walked the length of the ranch, checking every gate and every fence line. The sun dipped behind the hills, leaving long shadows stretching across the ground. The horses in the main pasture grazed quietly, unaware of the growing unease. But the new horse stayed near the far corner of the corral, watching the road with a stare that refused to soften. The ranch worker felt the pressure of unseen trouble closing in. He thought about the tracks he found earlier, about the riders the stranger mentioned, about the scar on the horse that had appeared with no clear cause. Each piece fit into something larger, though the full picture stayed murky. Night settled over the ranch with a crisp chill. The ranch worker stood near the fence long after the sky turned dark. He could not shake the feeling that something was moving closer, something connected to the horse's past. He knew he had to be ready, but he did not know what he was preparing for. Inside the corral, the horse lifted his head and stared at the road again. The ranch worker followed his gaze, and a quiet shiver moved through him. There was nothing visible in the dark, but the horse was staring as if he sensed someone out there, watching, waiting. Approaching Dot the next morning brought a quiet that felt too heavy to be natural. The ranch worker stepped outside before sunrise, hoping the cool air might clear his thoughts. The sky held a soft blue glow as the first light reached over the hills. Most days that sight settled his mind, but not today. Today the fields felt too still, the barns seemed too silent. Even the wind carried a sharp edge, as if warning something was coming. He walked to the corral where the horse waited, already awake. The horse stood tall and alert, ears pricked toward the same road he had stared at the night before. The ranch worker moved slowly, speaking in a low voice to let the horse know he was near. The animal responded with a short breath, not fearful but watchful. It was clear he had not relaxed through the night. The ranch worker studied the fence lines again, making sure every rail was tight and every gate was secure. Nothing seemed out of place, yet a deep instinct inside him kept whispering that something was wrong. He glanced toward the open fields behind the ranch and noticed how the tall grass shifted in uneven waves, bending more sharply than the breeze should allow. He kept his focus on the movement, waiting to see if it repeated. After a long moment, the grass stilled, leaving him unsure whether he had imagined it. By mid-morning, the townspeople began to arrive for their usual errands. Some came to pick up feed, others to ask if the ranch worker had heard anything more about the stranger. Most tried to keep their voices casual, but their eyes gave away their worry. Rumors had already spread across town, each version carrying new details that no one could confirm. Some said the riders were already nearby. Others said they had reached a settlement miles away, asking questions about a horse with a scar. A few believed the stranger might return. The ranch worker listened but offered no guesses. He knew adding more fear would only stir the town even more. Still, their concerns pushed at his thoughts like steady pressure. Every warning, every whispered theory, every uneasy look made the weight on his shoulders grow heavier. That afternoon he saddled another horse and rode the outer fence line. The sky had darkened with thick clouds, turning the fields into long stretches of shadow. He scanned the open land, keeping his attention on anything that looked out of place. Twice he thought he saw the shape of a rider in the distance, but both times it turned out to be nothing more than a dark stump or a bent tree branch. He told himself not to jump at shadows, though his nerves were already stretched thin. As he turned back toward the ranch, he glanced over his shoulder one more time. A sharp flicker of movement caught his eye near the far ridge. This time it was not a stump or a branch. A horse moved along the ridge, pausing just long enough for him to be sure. Before he could react, the rider shifted direction and dipped out of sight. He urged his horse forward, riding hard until he reached the ridge, but when he got there, the ground was empty, no rider. No hoofprints. Only the fading shape of dust that had not settled yet. He stared at it, sensing it had been left behind on purpose. Whoever it was, they wanted him to know they were close. A knot tightened in his chest. He returned to the ranch faster than before, checking behind him often, but nothing followed. When he reached the main yard, he saw the horse pacing inside the corral. The animal's steps were quick, restless, and full of nervous energy. The ranch worker climbed off and hurried to the fence, speaking softly to calm the horse. The horse stopped and pressed his nose to the rail, breathing hard. That evening, the clouds finally opened, releasing a steady rain that turned the yard into soft mud. The ranch worker sat near the barn door, watching the road while the rain fell in heavy lines. He could not shake the image of the rider on the ridge. It replayed in his mind with every breath. He wondered how long they had been tracking the ranch. He wondered how far they had spread across the land. He wondered whether the stranger's warning had come too late. The rain lasted through the night, washing away tracks and turning silence into a low drumming across the roofs. The ranch worker barely slept. He kept rising to check the yard and the corral. Each time he found the horse awake and alert, staring through the rain as though expecting someone to appear. By dawn the storm had passed, but the air felt cold and sharp. Thick fog settled over the fields, wrapping the ranch in a pale curtain that made it hard to see more than a few yards ahead. The ranch worker knew this kind of fog could hide anything. He fed the horses early, listening for any sound beyond the usual snorts and hoof steps. Through the fog, he noticed something new near the front gate. A patch of mud had been disturbed. He crouched down and saw the shape of fresh hoofprints, pressed deeper than the others. His pulse rose. These prints led toward the ranch, not away. When he followed them to the road, the trail broke apart where the ground turned rocky. He scanned the fog, feeling the weight of unseen eyes. He called out, asking if anyone was out there. No answer came, only the soft drip of rainwater falling from tree branches. He stayed still, listening hard, and caught the faint creak of a saddle somewhere beyond the fog. The sound was slow and cautious, the kind of movement made by someone who did not want to be found. He felt the chill move deeper into his bones. He stepped backward until he reached the fence, keeping his eyes on the shifting fog. A distant voice rose through the mist, too faint to make out the words. The horse in the corral answered with a sharp snort, lifting his head high. The ranch worker steadied himself, unsure how close the rider had come. He scanned for shapes, but the fog swallowed everything. The sound faded, but the tension stayed. By late morning, the fog finally thinned. The ranch worker kept to the yard, watching for any movement. A few townspeople showed up looking nervous. They said a pair of unfamiliar riders had been seen near the trading post at dawn. The riders were asking about the ranch and about a horse with a scar. The news sent a low stir of fear across the yard. One man asked if the ranch worker planned to hand the horse over. The ranch worker shook his head. He said he could not trust anyone who tracked an animal this way. Some townspeople agreed. Others warned him that holding on to the horse could bring danger to everyone. The ranch worker listened but did not answer. His thoughts were locked on the horse's tense gaze and the muffled voice in the fog. Later that day, he checked the back pasture. As he walked along the fence, he noticed a cut in the wire. It was small and carefully placed, not the work of cattle or weather. Someone had tested the fence, likely during the night. The cut was low enough that a person could pass through, but high enough that a horse could not. The message was clear. Whoever had come here wanted access to the ranch without being noticed. A heavy feeling spread through the ranch worker's chest. He fixed the wire, checking every corner twice. His mind filled with questions, but none had answers. Why were they so desperate to find the horse? Why did the horse grow tense at the slightest sound? Why did the stranger's warning carry so much weight? When the sun began to set, an orange glow stretched across the sky. The ranch looked peaceful on the surface, but underneath everything felt ready to break. The ranch worker stayed near the corral, keeping the horse close. The horse paced again, ears flicking toward distant sounds. Every shift of his weight told the ranch worker something was coming. The air felt too tight, too charged with tension to be coincidence. The ranch worker stood with his hand on the fence rail, listening to the quiet. The sun dipped behind the hills. Shadows deepened across the yard. A single gust of wind brushed past, carrying the scent of dust from the road. The horse turned sharply, staring toward the far end of the ranch. The ranch worker followed his gaze and saw movement along the fence line. Not a stray branch, not a wild animal. The dark shape of a rider moved slowly through the last traces of daylight, then another. And another. The ranch worker stepped forward, heart pounding as the shapes grew clearer. They were approaching without hesitation, spreading out across the fence line in a silent, measured pattern. The horse trembled with barely controlled fear, backing toward the center of the corral. More riders appeared behind the first group, forming a wide arc around the ranch yard. Their movements were slow and deliberate, as if they had rehearsed this many times. None of them spoke. None of them broke formation. The ranch worker kept his eyes on every shadow, every figure tightening the circle around the ranch. The tension rose until he could feel it in his teeth. The riders stopped at the edge of the yard, waiting in complete silence. The horse let out a sharp, panicked breath. The ranch worker realized the moment he had tried to prepare for was finally here. And whatever happened next would change everything. If you'd like, I can continue into the full climax next. The moment the tension broke, it felt like the whole world paused before slowly returning to motion again. The storm outside had finally calmed, and the winds no longer battered the windows. Inside the room, the air still carried the weight of everything that had happened, but there was something gentler moving through it now. The characters stood there breathing a little easier, even though questions still hovered around them. No one spoke for a while, as if each person needed a moment to collect themselves after all the pressure that had pushed them toward the climax. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It felt like the quiet that comes after a long night when you finally see the first hint of morning light. Ayan looked around slowly, his eyes tracing the room as if he wanted to make sure nothing else was waiting to jump out of the shadows. For so long he had carried the feeling that something hidden had been pushing them toward disaster. Now, standing on the other side of the worst moment, he felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. The main conflict had shaped him in ways he could only now begin to understand. He didn't feel proud or victorious. He felt grounded. He felt aware of what mattered. The fear that once consumed him now seemed small compared to the clarity rising inside him. Myra leaned against the table as she tried to steady her breathing. She had stayed strong through everything, but now that the danger had passed, her hands trembled a little. She didn't try to hide it. Ayan noticed, but instead of pointing it out, he moved closer and rested a hand near hers, giving silent support without forcing words between them. That simple gesture brought her comfort. She realized that the trust they had built through trial after trial would stay with them far longer than any moment of crisis. With every heartbeat, she understood how deep their connection had grown. Across the room, Sammy sat down slowly and let out a long breath. He had played a major role in bringing the truth forward, even though he had doubted himself the entire time. For days, the weight of responsibility had sat on his shoulders, and the fear of making the wrong move kept him awake. Now he felt lighter. He finally understood the difference between running from fear and choosing to face it. He thought about all the mistakes he had made earlier in the story and how those moments had pushed him to grow. The resolution didn't erase his regrets, but it gave him a chance to use them in a better way. Everyone in the room was dealing with emotions they had bottled up during the chaos. They needed time to accept that everything had changed. The conflict had forced them to confront truths they might otherwise have avoided. Now that things had settled, they had space to think again. Myra broke the silence first, her voice soft but steady. She said they still had a lot to talk about. She was right. Even though the tension had eased, the questions left behind needed answers. The group gathered around the table, choosing seats instinctively. Ayan leaned forward as Myra explained her thoughts piece by piece. Her words were clear, but there was kindness in them too. She didn't want to place blame. She wanted understanding. The truth behind everything that happened wasn't simple. There were mistakes made from fear, choices shaped by pressure, and decisions influenced by misunderstandings. Bringing all that into the open felt necessary for them to move forward. As each person shared their side of the story, the atmosphere shifted from tense to honest. The more they talked, the more they realized how much the conflict had clouded their judgment. All of them had acted from a place of survival, but now with calm returning, they could see things from a wider perspective. That clarity didn't erase the past, yet it helped them accept it with less bitterness. The story they had lived through wasn't just about tension and danger. It was about learning to trust again, finding courage when everything seemed broken, and understanding the value of unity. Once the room felt lighter, Ayan stood up and walked to the window. He pushed it open gently. Fresh air swept in, carrying the scent of wet soil and a hint of sunlight breaking through the clouds. The storm clouds were finally drifting away. The view outside no longer felt threatening. Instead, it symbolized a new beginning. He realized that the past days had forced him to see parts of himself he had once ignored. He no longer felt afraid of those parts. He felt ready to grow from them. Myra joined him by the window. She told him that even though things had been difficult, she believed they were all stronger because of it. She reminded him that conflict often reveals the truth that people avoid during peaceful moments. Her words settled something inside him. They looked out at the clearing sky together, both knowing they had crossed a major turning point in their journey. Meanwhile, Sammy and the others started picking up the scattered papers and broken pieces left from the climax. Cleaning the room felt symbolic. Every item they straightened, every piece they gathered, made them feel like they were clearing away more than physical mess. They were cleaning away fear. They were organizing their thoughts. They were rebuilding a space that had once felt unsafe, turning it back into a place where they could breathe and think without tension. There was something healing in the simple motions of putting things back where they belonged. As the hours passed, they planned their next steps. Even though the major conflict had ended, their lives still needed direction. The lessons they learned weren't going to fade. Myra suggested they use this moment to redefine their goals. Ayan agreed. For too long, they had reacted to threats instead of building something meaningful. Now they wanted to create choices instead of being forced into them. The sense of teamwork grew stronger with every sentence they exchanged. Later in the day, they gathered outside. The air felt warm, carrying a gentle calmness that wrapped around them as they stood beneath the slowly brightening sky. Each person reflected on the journey silently. The world around them seemed more open now. Sammy looked at the horizon and said that change didn't have to be frightening if they faced it together. His words felt true to everyone there. Ayan took a moment to thank each of them for staying by his side, even when things became overwhelming. Myra listened with a soft smile. She told him they didn't stay because they had to. They stayed because they believed in him and in each other. That reassurance soothed the last remnants of doubt inside him. With the conflict resolved, the tension that once controlled their lives seemed distant. But none of them wanted to forget the experience. It changed their choices, shaped their relationships, and gave them new understanding. They carried both the good and the difficult parts with them, knowing those memories would guide them forward. The journey had not been simple, but it had been meaningful. As they walked away from the place where everything reached its peak, there was no rush, no panic. Only a steady pace and a clear mind? The path ahead wasn't perfect or predictable, but it was open, and that openness felt like a gift. Each step carried hope. Each breath felt lighter. The conflicts that once controlled their stories now rested quietly in the past. The story ended with a sense of closure, not because everything became perfect, but because the characters understood themselves better. They grew through challenge, strengthened their bonds, and stepped into the future with new purpose. The lessons they learned stayed with them, reminding them how resilience and unity can guide people through even the toughest moments. Their journey came to an end in a calm, grounded way, not dramatic, not forced, just honest. And sometimes that is the most satisfying ending of all.